Welcome back to Coin Nexa Vault. Before we get into today's coins, I need you to understand something right now. Every single nickel we're covering in this video has a story behind it that most people walking around with these coins in their pockets will never know. And we are building towards something at the very end of this list that is, without any exaggeration, one of the most overlooked and genuinely remarkable Jefferson Nickels a collector can find in circulation today. So stay locked in from start to finish, because the further we go, the better it gets. And let's talk about the 2006 Jefferson Nickel, because if you've been sleeping on this one, today is the day that changes. Here's what most people don't realize. 2006 was actually a pivotal year for the Jefferson Nickel series, because it marked the return to the classic Felix Schlag obverse design that collectors had grown up loving, after several years of Westward Journey special reverse designs that divided the hobby, and the Philadelphia Mint struck hundreds of millions of these coins. But buried inside that massive production run are examples with striking characteristics that make certain pieces genuinely worth pulling out of your change jar and examining closely. What you're looking for is right on the obverse. Check the tensor lines on Jefferson's eye, particularly the definition in the pupil area just above the cheekbone ridge, and then flip the coin and look at Monticello's columns on the reverse. On the best struck examples, you can count every individual column with sharp separation, and the steps at the base of the building will show full, clean horizontal lines rather than a soft, mushy merge. That quality of strike is what separates a coin worth face value from one that a PCGS or NGC grader looks at and circles MS67 or higher. A certified 2006 Jefferson Nickel in MS67 full steps, that full steps designation being the critical detail, has sold in the range of several $100s, and in MS67 plus full steps territory the number climbs meaningfully higher, because full steps examples from Philadelphia in this year are genuinely harder to find than the raw mintage numbers would suggest. The reason for that difficulty comes down to the Philadelphia Mint's die usage practices. High-volume production means dies were used longer and under more pressure, which progressively flattens the fine detail on the steps and the portrait, so coins struck late in a die's life simply cannot achieve full steps no matter how well they're preserved afterward. The 2006 is a coin that rewards patience and a loop. Most people would pass it without a second glance, and that's exactly why the ones in top condition are worth finding. Condition is everything here, grading matters enormously, and third-party certification through PCGS or NGC is what turns a quality example into a documented, tradable asset. Now, if you thought a 2006 with the right details was interesting, the next coin on our list carries a production quirk from the late 90s that collectors have been chasing for years, and it is not what you'd expect from a coin most people spent without blinking. Next, 1997 Jefferson Nickel, and I'm going to make a direct claim right at the top. This is one of the most underappreciated Jefferson Nickels of the entire decade, and the reason comes down to a specific die characteristic that showed up in Philadelphia's production that year and created coins with a look that stands apart from anything else in the series. The 1997 is not a low mintage coin. Philadelphia struck well over 500 million of them. But here's the thing about massive mintage runs. They create noise, and inside that noise, the coins that came off the press at peak die quality with full, sharp detail on every design element become statistically rare even if the overall production number is enormous. The place to look on a 1997 is the 5 steps of Monticello on the reverse. Position the coin under good lighting at a low angle, and look for 5 fully separated, clearly defined horizontal lines running the full width of the staircase without merging, fading, or being interrupted by a weak strike in the center. That feature, full steps in certified grading language, is the single most important thing a Jefferson Nickel can have, and on the 1997 it is legitimately difficult to achieve because of the die wear patterns typical of that production year. A PCGS or NGC certified 1997P in MS66 full steps has traded in the low hundreds of dollars, and MS67 full steps examples, which are genuinely scarce, have commanded prices that would surprise anyone who thinks of this as just a coin from the 90s. Beyond the grading details, 1997 sits in an interesting moment for American coinage. The Mint was deep into planning the 50-state quarters program that would launch the following year, and the Jefferson Nickel was in some ways running on autopilot from a public attention standpoint, which meant fewer people were paying close attention to what was coming out of Philadelphia, and that inattention is part of why quality survivors are as scarce as they are today. If you've got a 1997P at home, pull it out, get it under a 10x loop, and focus on those steps, because the difference between a soft strike and a full steps coin in MS67 is the difference between 5 cents and a genuine collector find. As always, grade and certification are what convert a promising coin into a verified value, and PCGS and NGC are the names to trust. But hold that thought, because the coin coming up next takes us back to the 80s, and it carries a story about a specific production detail that makes it one of the more talked about Jefferson Nickels of that entire era. Next, 1986P Jefferson Nickel, and here's a contrarian take that the broader collecting community has been slowly catching up to. The mid-1980s Philadelphia nickels are quietly becoming some of the most sought-after circulation-era Jefferson nickels in the entire post-1970 period, and the 1986P in particular sits at the center of that conversation. The 80s were a complicated decade for the Philadelphia Mint. Production demands were high, die quality was inconsistent, and the result was a year-to-year variation in strike quality that makes finding a genuinely well-struck 1986P in surviving mint state condition a more meaningful achievement than most people recognize. Here's exactly where to look. On the obverse, examine the hair detail above Jefferson's ear and along the back of his head. On a well-struck example, those individual hair strands are sharp and separated all the way to the rim, and the jawline has a clean, defined edge rather than a soft merge into the field. Then on the reverse, go straight to those Monticello steps, because a 1986P with full steps is a coin that makes collectors stop scrolling. 5 clean, separated, full-width horizontal lines on the staircase. That's what you're hunting for, and finding it on a 1986P in MS67 condition is genuinely rare. Certified examples in MS67 full steps have sold for prices well into the hundreds of dollars, with the finest known examples trading at levels that reflect just how difficult this combination is to achieve for this specific date and mint. Part of what makes the 1986P compelling beyond the numbers is its historical context. 1986 was the year the Statue of Liberty Centennial was celebrated across America, a moment of significant national symbolism, and coins struck during years of cultural significance tend to attract collector attention over time in ways that aren't always predictable at the moment of production. The coin you're holding from 1986 was struck during a year that America was celebrating itself. And if it happens to be a Philadelphia nickel with sharp hair detail, a clean jawline, and 5 perfect steps on Monticello, you might be holding something considerably more interesting than a casual glance would suggest. Condition, grade, certification, those are the factors that separate a coin worth looking at from a coin worth submitting, and PCGS or NGC grading is the step that makes a quality example official. The coin coming up next takes us a step further back, to a year with no mint mark at all, and a detail that trips up even experienced collectors when they first encounter it. Next, 1975 Jefferson Nickel, and this one opens with a piece of information that genuinely surprises people when they hear it for the first time. In 1975, the Philadelphia Mint did not place a mint mark on any of its coins. Not on the nickel, not on any denomination, which means if you're looking at a 1975 nickel with no letter to the right of Monticello on the reverse, that is not an error, that is exactly how it was made, and understanding that context is the first step toward knowing what to look for on this coin. The no-mint mark era for Philadelphia ran from 1965 through 1979, a decision made in response to the coin shortage of the mid-1960s, and it creates an interesting situation for collectors because it removes one of the most common identifiers people use to sort coins. But it also means that every quality 1975 Philadelphia nickel lives or dies entirely on its strike quality and preservation, with no mint mark rarity to lean on. The visual evidence on this coin is all about the portrait and the reverse architecture together. Look at the letters in the word Liberty on the obverse. On a premium example, those letters are sharp and complete from the serif tips down to the baseline, with clean separation from the surrounding field, and then on the reverse, check the triangular roof pediment of Monticello above the columns on a top-grade coin. The fine lines in that pediment are individually visible rather than merging into a flat surface. A certified 1975 Jefferson Nickel in MS67 full steps. Full steps again being the critical designation, is a coin that appears rarely in certified registries, and when examples do surface at that grade level, they trade at prices that reflect genuine scarcity within the series. The 1975 nickel benefits from what collectors call the sleeper effect. Because it has no obvious rarity hook like a low mintage or a dramatic error, casual collectors overlook it, which means quality survivors have stayed more affordable longer than coins with equivalent scarcity in other series. But that window doesn't stay open forever as the Jefferson Nickel market continues to mature. If you encounter a 1975 nickel that looks unusually sharp and clean, treat it seriously, examine it carefully, and if it grades well under a loupe, consider getting it professionally certified. As always, PCGS and NGC are the standard, and condition is the variable that determines whether a 1975 Philadelphia nickel is worth 5 cents or considerably more. Everything we've covered so far has been building to this final coin, and I mean that literally because what's coming up last is the kind of Jefferson nickel that makes even experienced collectors do a double take. From a year and mint combination that produced some of the most genuinely remarkable surviving examples in the entire series. Next, 1952's Jefferson Nickel, and this is the grand finale, the coin that justifies every second you've spent watching this video, because the 1952's from the San Francisco Mint is, without overstatement, one of the most compelling Jefferson Nickels a collector can encounter from the entire mid-century era, and here's why. San Francisco in 1952 was producing coins in relatively small numbers compared to Philadelphia and Denver. The S mint mark you'll find to the right of Monticello on the reverse tells you this coin came from a facility that was already beginning to wind down its production of business strike coinage for circulation, and that lower production volume combined with the typical handling and spending of the era means that survivors in genuine mint state are significantly rarer than the casual observer would ever guess. Here is precisely what to look for. On the reverse, position the coin so the light catches the base of Monticello at a low angle and count the horizontal lines on the staircase. A 1952's with full steps means 5 complete, clearly separated, full-width lines running across the entire staircase with no merging, no weak central strike, and no interruption, and on this date, that is a meaningful challenge to find because San Francisco's dies from this period produced variable results even within the same production run. On the obverse, look at the fine detail in Jefferson's coat lapel and the area where his collar meets his jacket. On a well-preserved, sharply struck example, those fabric lines have genuine definition rather than flattening into the surrounding metal, and that level of detail combined with full steps on the reverse is the combination that makes numismatists genuinely excited. A certified 1952's Jefferson Nickel in MS66 full steps is already a serious coin, trading in the hundreds of dollars range, and in MS67 full steps, a designation that very few examples from this date have achieved. the value enters territory that most people would find astonishing for a coin that originally left the San Francisco Mint worth 5 cents. The historical backdrop matters too. 1952 was the final years of the Korean War era, a moment when American manufacturing and government operations were running under wartime pressure, and the San Francisco Mint was producing coinage against that backdrop with the specific quirks and characteristics of a facility that would soon step back from high-volume business strike production, making the coins it struck during this window genuinely historical artifacts, not just collectibles. Every element that makes a Jefferson nickel worth chasing: low regional survival rate, full steps difficulty, mid-century San Francisco provenance, and the simple passage of 7 decades, comes together in the 1952s in a way that no other coin on today's list can quite match. Get it certified, because a strong example without third-party grading from PCGS or NGC is leaving real money on the table, and condition, as always, is the variable that separates the extraordinary from the ordinary. If you've got a coin like any of these sitting at home, drop a comment and let me know. And if you enjoyed this, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one.